everybody and welcome along to a brand new video where today I'm going to be giving you guys my thoughts on the brand new soundtrack that was released 1 week ago today for Class. So yes, we've been waiting rather a while for it. Class of course aired from October to December 2016 and 2 years on, finally Blair MOA has managed to release a soundtrack for it. A fantastic soundtrack with a bonus CD soundtrack. Here they are, so you can see them. That's terrible lighting, but something like that. So you can see that's the normal release and that's the bonus disc. And to be honest, I'm really liking this soundtrack. So I know what one of the big things that Blair MOA said he wanted to do, certainly with this soundtrack, was very much on the kind of main album soundtrack of it, really kind of have a nicely flowing soundtrack that really almost tells a story and really kind of it all sort of makes sense as you listen through to it. Really sort of feel like you're listening through a story almost, and I really get that from this album. You get, there's such variety that was in the score originally and it comes out in the soundtrack, going from sort of a lot of fairly emotive music into some heavy sort of electric guitar and heavy metal almost music to kind of electronic-y ambient music and everything in between. It really is a very varied stuff, even back to just sort of pure violin and sort of string instrument music, then a bit of piano-y music. It's just got a bit of everything in there, which I think is really fantastic, but it also really knits together really nicely to create a lovely sort of whole album. And yes, so the main album has 43 tracks on it and sort of encapsulates all 8 episodes of Class when it originally aired, kind of telling us the story through each of the 8 episodes, pretty much in order as far as I can tell, from For Tonight We Might Die through to The Lost. And it really is, it does feel like there's a good amount for every single episode. It doesn't feel any of the episodes are underserved particularly. Certainly all the sort of memorable tracks, at least that I can remember, feel like they're on there. And it just really, as I say, flows really nicely. Looking at some of the kind of highlights of the soundtrack, the first track of the album, one that I really like, is the Shadowkins theme, which has those really kind of heavy, really heavy beats that sort of really pulsate through this piece of music and really kind of indicate that the Shadowkin are about to appear on screen or are on screen. And I think that really is used very effectively throughout other tracks in this soundtrack as well, not just in that first track, but kind of this first kind of little suite I think sounds really kind of intense and really kind of dark and really fits the kind of vibe of the Shadowkin. Then a couple of the big highlight tracks, the ones that I think people have probably been looking for, are the Rhodia track, which features the Doctor's theme in the second half of the track, and also The Doctor Will See You Now, which is the epic variation of A Good Man, the 12th Doctor's theme, which we hear sort of in this 1-minute piece. And although it's literally 66 seconds, it probably is my favourite sort of track from both this album. It's just so kind of like epic. It's such a brilliant take on the 12th Doctor's theme, bringing in all these really heavy electrical guitars that we never really hear as the proper sound, the sort of normal sound of the 12th Doctor's theme. And it just sounds absolutely kind of electrifying and fantastic, and putting it on your headphones, max volume, it just sounds absolutely stunning. And so I think it absolutely is my favourite track from this soundtrack. And then even towards the end of the sort of tracks from For Tonight We Might Die are really fantastic. You've got this kind of beautiful night music when after sort of everything's happened and they're all heading back home and trying to kind of recover from it, and the sort of fallout from everything that's happened at the end of episode 1. And it's just a really kind of beautiful, more sort of calm, nice piece of music, but kind of conveying the sadness I think as well that kind of comes out of it. And then we finished the sort of For Tonight We Might Die section with the Cabinet of Souls, which technically, as Blair says, isn't really the proper Cabinet of Souls theme, but it's very much just a kind of building piece of music that can close out on a sort of cliffhangery ending to the first episode, and I think it really does that very effectively. I should shout out on the moment to Blair MOA and the notes that he's done for this soundtrack, because you can see them, I've got them here, and this is just for about 8 or 9 of the tracks. He's got a proper description of all 43 tracks of this album. It's not just like per episode he's done a general paragraph about it, but it's like a paragraph or multiple paragraphs on every single individual track, which is just fantastic and really gives a brilliant insight into kind of the inspiration behind tracks, the difficulties of recording it, the different instruments used and everything. And it's just a really kind of detailed and interesting guide to how this Class soundtrack came together. You can tell how much love Blair has put into this. It's very much been sort of his child almost. He's really kind of obviously composed it 2 years ago and has just always seen that there's a real sort of fan base for it, and I'm really pleased to see how much sort of love and care and attention and effort he's put into making this fantastic. And yeah, even just things like these notes really show that as well. We've got a couple of more sort of heavy rock tracks for the Teacher with the Dragon Tattoo, I think the name of the Coach with the Dragon Tattoo, that's the name of it. Goodness me, it's been so long since I watched Class, I'm sorry guys. And then some fantastic tracks from Night Visiting as well, which has a very different feel to it. Particularly the kind of almost epic track of Gathering Strength that we see on this soundtrack, which is also used at the end of episode 4, Covering Over a Lonely Heart. That just absolute kind of epic peak of music that you almost get as you build into this cliffhanger at the end of episode 4. And it's just so kind of epic, I think, which is what I love about a lot of this soundtrack. It really just feels really big. It feels really kind of not over the top, but kind of to putting everything up to 11 in terms of the kind of, yes, epicness, loudness of this soundtrack. It does feel very well mixed, I have to say. There isn't any sort of funny tracks that sort of have an odd ending or a weird fade between 2 bits in a suite of music or anything like that. It's all very, very nicely done, and also sounds very nicely mixed in terms of the sort of sound levels and everything. It's mixed quite loudly, I think it's fair to say, compared to some of the Doctor Who soundtracks that we get. It's like it's just mixed that little bit louder, but I think it works really effectively because of the type of music it's using, and so you really can stick it in your headphones and absolutely blast it out and almost destroy your eardrums, I guess. But I really enjoy it, and I think it sounds fantastic. Skipping through to episode 6, which is Detained, there's a few nice sort of couple of bits of electronic-y music, because Blair talks about how he wanted to very much go down a more electronic sort of soundscape. It just seemed to fit with that particular episode, and there's some really, really nice sort of suites of very interesting sort of almost experimental electronic-y kind of music that really fits really nicely in the episode, but actually sounds a lot better than maybe you might expect on the soundtrack as well. So that sort of track called Asteroid is definitely worth a check as well, and there's a couple of other ones around there that just kind of really give the feel of that episode really, really nicely, but also sound a very nice piece of music. And even sort of coming towards the end of this part of the soundtrack, there's some fantastic tracks from the Metaphysical Engine, or What Quill Did, I believe it's called. There's some really kind of epic-y stuff, kind of bringing in the theme, sort of Quill's theme, the sort of team class theme that Blair MOA calls it. Also Charlie's theme a bit as well, and kind of combining all those together into some of these later tracks, very much, yeah, bringing in the variations of themes that he's set up earlier in this soundtrack, which I think is really fantastic. And again, just adds to that epic feel and scale to it. When I sit here and listen to it, I just kind of am quite amazed that this ultimately was for a BBC Three programme that didn't even air really on TV, sort of properly at least. This was meant as an online BBC Three programme, and it's got a sort of, it almost feels like you can have it almost as a blockbuster film sort of soundtrack. It really does sound that sort of fantastically kind of orchestrated and that sort of epic feel to it, I think. So I really am very impressed. And then there's the final episode, The Lost, which has lots of really, really nice tracks in it. Obviously the highlight, and I think a track that's, I think is probably one of the most requested from Class that there's been, was the Souls Released track, the track right from the end of episode 8 when the Cabinet of Souls is released. That absolutely kind of, again, I keep using the word, but epic, very, very big, sort of bringing in the electric guitars, the heavy kind of rock style to it as well, and just combining everything into one to make a massive piece of music for the kind of conclusion of this episode. And I think it really is one of the highlights of the soundtrack for me. It just feels so sort of fantastic and epic and massive and over the top. And it just kind of really kind of gives a great sort of ending to the soundtrack almost, because then you only have a couple more tracks after that with the Governor's track where they're finally revealed and the Weeping Angels is revealed, spoiler alert, and all of that, and then the nice sort of credits music with Class as well. So it really does have a nice kind of ending to this album as well. So that just about covers the kind of main album, the one that you'd find normally in shops, which is really, really fantastic. 43 tracks, it's about an hour and 20 minutes. It's a really sort of just a really good listen. Like, it doesn't sort of get boring particularly at any points. It doesn't feel like there's kind of too much on there, that at points you've got some of the less interesting music that kind of sags a bit and you want to skip on to the next track. But it very much, every track has something interesting about it, and every track kind of brings you in and makes you want to keep listening to through the next one and through the next one. So I think that is kind of the sign of a fantastic soundtrack. And particularly that, bearing in mind that originally this is just scored for a TV show, it's not particularly scored with releasing it on a soundtrack in mind. So being able to put together such a good soundtrack off that, I think is really, really sort of impressively done. And so hats off to Blair MOA, he's done a fantastic job with this. The other thing I just wanted to give a quick mention to was the bonus disc, which you get if you order sort of, I think, the limited edition version on the Silver Screen website. I think that's pretty much the only place you can get it. I think you can probably still get hold of it, but you might have to have a look on the website, I'm not quite sure. But this kind of disc is sort of almost a bonus. Well, it is a bonus naturally, but it's kind of like a extra, sort of all the extra stuff that didn't quite make it onto the normal album, like stuff that didn't quite sort of fit with the flow of the album that Blair was going for, but still is worth listening to. He wanted to do an extra disc to be able to kind of incorporate all that. For us, people like me, a sort of completist Doctor Who / Class fan, who really, really wants to just be able to hear as much of the music as possible rather than just the soundtrack that flows the nicest. So this is kind of a bit more of a, I guess, a mishmash almost of pieces of music. So there's sort of there's not really a flow to sort of how it goes, how we move through the different tracks. It's very much just kind of all put together there for you to have a listen to, and that's fine. That's the goal of this CD, and I think it does a really good job of that. In terms of the sort of really good stuff that's on here, one of the ones that I particularly like is the Korokainis Lives track, which is kind of bringing in just a different version of the Shadowkins theme. Often in the actual episodes they were kind of layered, the sort of Shadowkin theme and this theme were layered on top of each other, but this bit's really nice to listen to as well. There's the sort of song from the beginning of Night Visiting. I can't remember quite what the song is, if it has an official title, but that's in full on here and sounds really nice, and I'm really enjoying that as well. The Detained track, so the titular track from the episode Detained, which is a 6 or 7 minute suite, I believe, of that sort of electronic-y, ambient-y kind of music, which I really think is fantastic and really enjoy listening to, and I think it fits really nicely on this bonus disc as well. It's a lovely suite of music, really sort of an interesting listen, and it's just great to see on this particular bonus disc the kind of amount of stuff that Blair wants to put on this. Like, he's got the little 40-second cues of music from the Next Time trailers at the end of every episode. All of those are on this soundtrack, which is just like kind of crazy almost, that he'd sort of bothered to put what seems like fairly trivial, unnecessary pieces of music that just kind of serve their purpose and that's it, but he's actually gone to the effort of putting these onto the soundtrack alongside a bit of music that he used in a Big Finish class adventure that he made, where he remixed Charlie's theme into a sort of remembrance of the Dalek style, and that sounds pretty wacky and properly sort of 80s electronic style, but it sounds really fantastic, to be honest. I really enjoyed it. And through that, there's just a huge amount of other tracks sort of on both discs that I can't even really mention right now, because there's just so many good ones on there. There's 89 tracks across 2 discs, around 2.5 hours of music, and it really, I would say, is worth a purchase, worth a listen if you can get hold of it. Even if you haven't really watched much of Class before or really heard the soundtrack before particularly, it really is worth a listen, particularly that first disc. It just is a very kind of complete sort of selection of pieces of music that really, as I say, flow nicely one from another to create a lovely soundtrack as a whole. So yes, I'd rate this very highly. I think probably as a sort of complete release, it's probably better than Doc 2 Series 9 soundtrack, just because it is more complete. There is everything that you want to be on here, whereas it certainly is fair to say the Series 9 soundtrack was lacking some music. In terms of the actual tracks on there, it's debatable. I love a lot of Series 9. Obviously, the Heaven Sent score is incredible. And so that obviously comes above Class, but there is a lot of fantastic stuff. Just some of the main themes and the variations we hear of it during the sort of various tracks on here are just so fantastic, and just, I think, almost bring back a little bit of nostalgia, because I did actually quite enjoy Class at the time, and it's just nice to be reminded of that. And listening to this, it makes me want to watch the series all over again. But if you bought the soundtrack, guys, do let me know down in the comments below what you think about it. What are your favourite tracks from what you've heard so far? I'd love to hear what you guys had to say about this soundtrack. But other than that, guys, do remember to hit that like button, subscribe if you're new here, and I'll be back again very soon for another video. Goodbye.